Today we're going to be talking about Dr. Umar Johnson. Dr. Umar Johnson and why his school failed. Dr. Umar Johnson has been promising to open a school for over a decade. He's raised hundreds of thousands of dollars for it. He's toured the country as Black America's #1 most requested scholar and orator. And as of August 2025, the one physical building he actually did manage to buy, the Wilmington property meant to house the Frederick Douglass Marcus Garvey Academy, was staring down a sheriff's sale over unpaid property fees and utilities. This isn't a story about a scam artist with nothing behind him. It's more interesting than that. It's a story about a man who had a real credential, a real following, a real cause, and still couldn't get that one thing he built his entire brand around off the ground. So the question is worth asking. Was Dr. Umar Johnson a fraud? It's, why did a genuinely talented communicator with a real doctorate and a real audience fail at the one project he said mattered the most? Let's talk about the Chamberlain Hunt, the detour. Before Wilmington and Delaware, there was Mississippi. Johnson had his eye on Chamberlain Hunt Academy in Port Gibson, a 19th century boarding school with a strange older history. It was built with proceeds from the sale of the old Oakland College campus, the same campus that became Oakland A&M, the first land-grant college for African Americans in the country. The school closed in 2014 after enrollment collapsed. It sat there, historic and empty, a plausible shell for the kind of institution Johnson wanted to build. It never happened. And the reason it never happened tells you almost everything about the pattern that will repeat in Delaware. An ambitious announcement, a fundraising push, momentum that outran the actual logistics of buying, renovating, staffing, and accrediting a boarding school. Chamberlain Hunt wasn't a betrayal, it was a preview. And I know this from a personal perspective because I've actually seen Chamberlain Hunt in person. The core fatal flaw of Dr. Umar Johnson is familiarity breeds resentment. Here's the thesis. Johnson's biggest liability was never his projects, and it wasn't even the money. It was a shift in his relationship with his own audience. He built his reputation as a distant academic figure, a doctor, a scholar, someone you watched give a 45-minute lecture and came about thinking this one has answers I don't. That distance was the source of his authority. Then social media happened, and instead of staying the distant expert, Johnson became a constant presence, reacting to news cycles, feuding with critics, weighing in on Deion Sanders leaving Jackson State, doubling down on takes about Kevin Samuels. The more accessible he became, the more he looked like a guy with opinions instead of a guy with a plan. Familiarity doesn't build trust. It breeds resentment. People who once referred to him as an authority start to argue with him as a peer. And once you're arguing with your audience as a peer, you've lost the thing that made you special in the first place. Next is the money problem. The second crack was financial transparency. Johnson managed significant money through GoFundMe and direct donations, but critics, most prominently The Root, pointed out that the organization lacked the necessary qualifications, and there was no clear public accounting of where donations actually went. A $5 million fundraiser goal came and went without being hit. GoFundMe campaigns were suspended. When your entire pitch is giving money to build something for the community, the absence of a paper trail isn't a minor detail. It's the whole ball game. Once it's the product you're selling, it's also the first thing that gets audited. The next question. Is an Afrocentric school even viable? There's a fair question underneath all of this that's worth taking seriously and isn't something you can easily dismiss. Would a school built around Afrocentric identity actually prepare kids to compete in the world they're living in today? The honest question is, it depends entirely on what's inside the curriculum. If the core is math and science and rigorous academics with an Afrocentric cultural framing wrapped around it, that's a defensible model. Plenty of culturally specific schools operate exactly that way and produce strong outcomes. And that's actually the direction Johnson's public messaging drifted over time. Early on, his rhetoric leaned heavily into pseudo-historical Afrocentrism, spiritualism, Egyptology, adjacent claims about ancient black civilization. As it got more famous and more mainstream, a lot of that fell away in favor of more conventional, less esoteric expressions of Afrocentrism, pride, history, self-determination, without the more fringe metaphysical baggage. Whether that shift was strategic or genuine, it suggests even Umar's understood the pseudo-spiritual material was a liability with a wider audience. Next is the credential question and Johnson's degree in and of itself. This one is more complicated than either side wants to admit. Johnson does hold a real, verifiable Doctor of Psychology and Clinical Psychology from Philadelphia College of Osteopathic Medicine, conferred in 2012. Outlets that set up to debunk him, including The Root, ended up confirming this after actually checking, so fake doctorate isn't accurate. What is accurate, he was investigated by Philadelphia State Psychology Board over whether he misrepresented himself as a licensed practicing psychologist rather than a certified school psychologist. Two very different things with very different legal standing. He disputed the characterization the matter did in his career, but it's exactly the kind of credibility gray zone that sticks. Not he lied about his degree, but he let the ambiguity around his title do more work than it should have. None of this required Dr. Umar Johnson to be a con man. A distant academic doesn't survive contact with the influencer economy without losing some mystique. A fundraising operation without institutional transparency doesn't survive scrutiny once it gets big enough to attract scrutiny. And a man who spent his career as a public speaker and school psychologist, not an administrator, not a fundraiser, not someone with experience standing up in an accredited institution, was always going to struggle with the actual mechanics of running a boarding school, let alone funding one from scratch. The idea wasn't the problem. An independent, rigorous, culturally specific school for black boys is not an inherently bad idea. Versions of that model exist and work. The problem was that the person best positioned to steal the idea was never the person best equipped to build it. And nobody around him was willing or able to fill that gap. That's why more than a decade after the first promised school, the closest thing to a campus he ever bought is the subject of a sheriff's auction notice.